Thanks very much, Martin, and it's been, I think, really valuable for us to have you as the Dean of the School of Architecture here at the RMIT working with us in the Balanced Victoria program. This was a document that Steve Braxton and I launched here back in August, I think, and it's up on our website, so if anyone wants to tap into that, there's a lot of really interesting data in that, and it really sets the scene as to why we need to do something. There's a lot of people who have said that livability, which Melbourne has, if not been top of the world in, it's been second or third, always well placed. That livability is one thing that we really pride ourselves in Melbourne about. But all the stats, when you look worldwide, shows that cities, once they reach 5 million, livability starts to sink like a stone. And I think we're seeing a lot of those pressures that are happening in Melbourne now. We're going through a really interesting period in Melbourne particularly, but I suppose in the rest of the country and also in places like Sydney, where we're seeing the largest growth in population since the gold rush of the 1850s and 60s. I think last year we had a growth in Melbourne of around 120,000 people. Now that's bigger than Ballarat or Bendigo. Significant growth. What we're seeing though is that it's very centralised and it continues to spill out towards the fringes. So the Point Cooks and the Craigieburns and areas out to the west continue to grow, almost disorganised. And I think what high-speed rail offers is it offers connectivity. It enables us to tap into areas perhaps 100 kilometres out and have access with high-speed rail, genuine high-speed rail of over 300 kilometres an hour, back into the centre of the city within 20 to 30 minutes. And that's a game changer. I think what it then does put in those regions an opportunity for people to live in those regions and perhaps commute back to Melbourne. Eventually, as more jobs are created in the regions, I think you'll see that even lessen off. But if people wanted to come into last night's football match at the MCG or come to a show in the city at one of the theatres on a Friday or Saturday night, all those things are quite achievable for people right within that arc. So I think we saw when we created, I suppose, connectivity when we put in CityLink back in the 1990s, a lot of that arc where the CityLink freeway ran through was just bare paddocks. And I remember driving around it and there was bugger all traffic on the freeway. And as I said, green grass for a fair portion of it. It was so quickly filled in by industry with factories when they realised that they had that accessibility, linking the ports to those areas that before were probably beyond their reach. Melbourne has always had that, and as most Australian cities, the quarter-acre block mentality. We've seen obviously some bigger growth in the inner Melbourne area, but we've seen very little growth in large population numbers within those inner suburbs, and then the rest spills out to the outer fringes, like the Point Cooks and the Craigieburns. And there's been that pushback from the Save Our Suburbs group who've said, well, do it somewhere else, but not in our area. So the rail, I think, offers an opportunity for us to really focus on if we can develop expansion to areas like Geelong and create new urban developments in those areas. And Golden Plains, I think, is another area that we could actually see some development in. We actually start to really rethink about how we actually build these cities and do them at not just better than what we have done, but really set a scene for doing the world's best. And as Martin said, there are so many opportunities. I mean, we could start with complete recycling of storm water. We could have 2 piping systems, one for drinking and one for your other uses for your toilet, your garden, etc. We could look at ways of being totally self-sufficient in terms of energy generation. The Germans are developing roof tiles now, which you probably all know about, that are a solar panel. So every house in a new city should have that on it. We had some American friends who were showing us carpet squares that when you walk on them, they generate electricity. So, you can feed the kids the purple cordial and get them really hyped up and get them running around the house, and you'll be saving on your power bills. And you can do the same with footpaths, and you could probably do the same also with road if you put concrete paving in. So there's things that we know now are being developed. There are things that we know will be developed in the next decade that will be even smarter. And I think what we need to actually do is set our sights for that sort of development. Think about the brightest possible things that could be added to a new city, and not just make this somewhere good enough, but make it a role model for the world that everyone else can follow. To give you one basic stat that really stuck with me in our Develop Victoria studies was that London, with a population of about 10 million, Greater London, had a footprint that was 1/6 the size of Melbourne, with 5 million people. So we've got 1/12 the density. We know that out on the fringes of Melbourne, public transport is not good, and where it is, it takes a long time to get anywhere. All our focus, I think, for the last 50 years, or probably post-war, has been about accommodating cars and trucks, and we haven't done enough about public transport, or in so many European cities that the commuting by public transport is taken as a norm. In many European cities, getting around by bicycle, in places like Holland, we see that as a norm. So I think we need to take a view that just because we're a huge continent with a small population, we don't need to actually spread out as much, and we can make cities more livable, we can make them safer. I'd like to see a new city developed, or the new development of urban development on the fringe of Geelong that actually takes all these factors that Martin's talking about, where we can actually bring the very best and include that. I think the other thing that is particularly important, that this is something that needs a bipartisan approach, and I was really happy to do this initial development on our regional development program with Steve Bracks, because it transcends politics. It's something that we're looking at planning for our communities, not just 20 or 30 years ahead. We're talking about planning for centuries ahead. And we also need to actually realise that many of our resources, and particularly water, are a limited resource, and we need to use that efficiently and reuse it efficiently. And then those sorts of issues have not been on the agenda. We know about transport congestion, we know about the issues of livability, we know the issue of housing affordability. And that is a significant one, particularly for many young couples as they try and start their families off. If we can create these sorts of developments where they can develop and get a block of land and build a house, I think on our studies, Jeff, we've shown that you could probably do it at 2/3 the cost of what people are paying out on these fringes of Melbourne, where they're probably twice the commuting distance of the city. My daughter and her husband got married about a year ago, and they bought a property down at Parkdale. They both work in the city. It takes them about 50 minutes by train. 1.3 million for a duplex, 3-bedroom plus an office, saddled with a huge mortgage. We think in a development that Jeff's talking about around Geelong, we could do that same sort of property probably for about 800,000. $500,000 less in mortgage. That's a game changer. So it's not a matter of this is a nice thing to have. This is something that we actually have to do. And I'd like to compliment the RMIT and the enthusiasm that all the other participants in this forum are taking. And we need to make sure that the people who are developing the policy and implementing the policy realise that this is not just something that is a nice to have, which decentralisation has been for so long. Oh yes, well, we're all in favour of decentralisation, and we're all in favour of motherhood and a few other things, but doing bugger all about it. We know from the studies that we've looked at, with the movement of people coming out of the metropolitan area to our 3 next largest centres, to Ballarat, Bendigo and Geelong, there was an average of 188 people over the last 5 years went to Bendigo, an average of 200 per year went to Ballarat, and an average of 700 went to Geelong out of Melbourne. At the same time, Melbourne grew by 125,000 that year. So that's statistically irrelevant. And nothing that we've done in the past or nothing that people are talking about in the future is having any solid impact on real decentralisation. I think connectivity through a high-speed rail, I'm not talking about one that is slightly faster, 160 kilometres, I'm talking 300 to 350 kilometres now, where people could get from the outskirts of Geelong into the city in under 20 minutes. That's the game changer. And then we can build the urban development that we all want, we all need, and we all deserve. Thank you.